Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Douglas and Sarah Allison Auditorium. We appreciate those who are joining us on our heritage.org website as well as C-SPAN during this presentation. I would ask everyone here in-house if you'll be so kind to check that cell phones have been turned off. It is always appreciated. And of course, our internet viewers are always welcome to send questions or comments at any time, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. Following, of course, we will have a period for question and answers as well for you, and would ask that you wait for the microphone for the convenience of recording. Opening our program this morning and making a special welcome to our guests here at Heritage is the current president of the Heritage Foundation, former Senator Jim DeMint. Please join me in welcoming Senator DeMint.
Thank you, John. Merry Christmas, everyone, and Merry Christmas to all who are tuning in through the Heritage Network or through C-SPAN. This is a great day to come together and talk about the power of ideas, and we've got a super panel here today, and it's our job at Heritage to help to shape the debate, build consensus around ideas that'll make life better for people all across America and, in fact, all around the world. And part of that process is bringing in people from all walks of life, experience in the media, business, the think tank world, and to actually vet different ideas and to set priorities as an organization and I think as a conservative movement. So that's a big part of what we're doing today. I appreciate Steve Moore leading this, and I'm sure Larry will completely introduce our panelists. But Larry, Carly, Art, James, thank you for, I can't think of a better panel. And the idea is to do this and have other guests and all around the country to bring America in and help America see those ideas that really will build a stronger country, a brighter future, and a better life for all Americans. What we want to deliver to members of Congress, to presidential candidates, and to the country as a whole is a conservative policy reform agenda that really focuses on opportunity for all and favoritism for none. That's really where the dividing line is in politics. It's the politics of division on the left, breaking people into groups, playing one group against another, trying to get special carve-outs, whether it's crony capitalism or other types of giveaways, versus the idea that we're all Americans. We all want opportunity for ourselves, our future. We all want to build a better country. And that's an inspiring message that Americans want to hear. I'm not know of any Americans, I'm sure there's some, but most Americans don't want to be part of a minority. They want to be Americans. And they want to have the same opportunity, and they don't like a government, whether it's at the state or federal level, that's picking favorites, picking winners and losers, and taking taxpayer money and throwing it one way or another. It's not fair, and it's not equitable, and that's really our focus here. What you're going to hear today, I'm sure, is a lot of good economic messages, what we can do, whether it's with energy or tax code, and I can't think of a better group to talk about that and really dig down into the issues. Larry Kudlow is going to facilitate this, one of my favorite people in the media, one of the, I think, the brightest minds, economic minds in the world, and I've told him several times I love being on his Saturday radio show where we can just sit back and dig in for 30 minutes, an hour, or whatever, and talk about ideas. And so, Larry, thank you for being here and leading this, and I'm going to leave it to you, and I hope I can do my next meeting quickly and be right back to listen to what you're saying. Now, Larry, welcome to Heritage.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it very much. Many thanks to Senator Jim DeMint, who is truly a great American. We're blessed to have him. Okay, I'm Larry Kudlow of CNBC and Cumulus Westwood Radio, and we have a distinguished panel. Essentially, we're going to try to talk about ideas to promote economic growth, the application of free market principles to promote economic growth. There are a lot of angles to it. There are a lot of subheadings to it. I will just say from my own standpoint, domestically, the greatest challenge to America in the next decade is to restore economic growth and to at least, at a minimum, get us back to the post-World War II trend line, which is about 3.5% per year, and we have fallen way behind that trend line in the last two cycles, as much as $4 trillion behind that, maybe $2 trillion at the low end. We need to do that. We need to create jobs, incomes, social mobility, families, and it stretches over a number of things: taxes, energy, all deregulation, including Obamacare, spending limits. The dollar and monetary policy plays an important role, and trade plays a very important role. I notice Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is one of the co-chairmen of the Sandinista wing of the Democratic Party, has come out today in the newspapers against the trade promotion bills, both the European bill and the Pacific bill, which is a perfect example of Congress sending the wrong message and failing to understand what causes growth and what continues growth. So that is essentially what we are trying to do. Now, to my left immediately is Ms. Carly Fiorina, an old friend, and by way of introduction, as actually Arthur said before we came up, and I agree, I think the greatest part of Carly's backdrop is that she started as a secretary and rose to become the chief executive officer of HP, Hewlett-Packard. I think that's most remarkable, the most American thing imaginable. All right, we are fortunate to have her here, and we are fortunate to have her pitching in for the principles that we believe in. She is also the chairman of Opportunity International and Good 360, chairs the American Conservative Union, and I think importantly, chairman of Unlocking Potential, which is a group to engage women in the political process at the grassroots. I know my bride saw Carly speak in New York the other day and was ready to sign up. So we'll hear from Carly in just a moment. Jim Pethokoukis is the DeWitt Wallace Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, distinguished blogger and columnist, and a contributor to CNBC. Arthur Laffer is the head of Laffer Associates. Really, Arthur Laffer I've known for, I don't know, coming on to 40 years, I think, the father of supply-side economics, and I believe one of the most important economic voices in the 20th century, period, in the 20th century. And finally, as you know, Steve Moore, now the head economist here at Heritage, also an old and dear friend of mine who has held many positions, I won't say most notably, but importantly, as a member of the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal for many years, pumping out exactly the kind of stuff that we need pumped out on the benefits of free market economics. And I can only assume that a large percentage of Congress does not has no reading skills because of the bad education background. The failure of the American education system has contributed to their failure to read the Wall Street Journal editorials, which Steve Moore wrote. And we would all be better if they had. So, without further ado, we're going to work this. I'm going to kind of be the moderator, Cutler Report style. I'm going to let each of the panelists speak for about 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to go back and forth. I'll ask questions. We will have crosstalk. It's very low-keyed, relaxed. We are all friends, even where we disagree. So let me begin with my friend Carly Fiorina. And Carly, on the matter of growth, I'll just try to shape this a little bit. On the matter of promoting economic growth, what would you see, what would you say are, let's say, the 3 most important ideas in your mind if you were given a magic wand to run the country?
Well, thank you, Larry, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone this morning here at Heritage and with my distinguished panelists. I think we have to start with a recognition of what the most important resource we have really is. The most important resource we have, the only limitless resource we have, is human potential. And this country became the greatest economy on the face of the planet and in all of human history because we created an economic system that unlocked more human potential. I started out as a secretary, and one of the most important things that happened in my young life was when 2 men in that little 9-person business came up to me and said, "We think you have potential to do more than type and file. Do you want to know what we do?" Somebody took a chance on me. And in truth, everyone needs someone to take a chance on them. I happen to chair something called Opportunity International. We're the largest microfinance organization in the world. We lift people, mostly women, out of poverty, out of destitute circumstances. We do so by giving them a starter loan of $150. We've lent $6 billion that way. And that experience demonstrates that everyone has potential regardless of their circumstances, that everyone wants to live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning regardless of their circumstances. And this became the greatest country on the face of the earth because our founders knew that. And when they said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, what they meant was everyone should have the opportunity to use their God-given gifts and fulfill their potential. And we created a system where more things were more possible for more people. We did that in very large measure because small businesses thrived and entrepreneurship was valued. I started a little 9-person company, most people do. Small businesses, not big businesses, give 2/3 of Americans their first job. They employ half the people. Little businesses innovate at 7 times the rate of big businesses. So we have to understand that if we want to grow our economy, we have to start focusing on the most important resource we have, human potential, and unlock it. We have to understand that one of the ways to do that is to revitalize Main Street entrepreneurship. We have to recognize that today, for the first time in U.S. history, we are now destroying more businesses than we are creating. Yep. Big businesses are doing great. Yep, the stock market is doing great. But small businesses are struggling because they cannot handle the crushing load of complexity, bureaucratic inertia, and regulatory thicket that government puts on them, and it's been going on for 40 years. Today in this country, we are wasting potential. 1 in 6 people live in poverty. That burden rests most heavily on women and children. Income inequality is at its highest level in decades, and by the way, it is highest in places like California, where liberal economic policies have been in place for 30 years. Our innovation rate is slowing. So I think to focus on economic growth, we must focus first on how do we ensure that every single American has a chance to fulfill their potential. And that means every single American has to be given a helping hand, not a way of life called dependence and entitlement. And our systems today trap people in a lifetime of dependence and entitlement. You get a job, you lose something. You get married, you lose something. So we have to recognize, we have to unlock that potential, give people education, tools, training, make sure we have jobs for everyone, because everyone wants to live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. We have to revitalize Main Street. We have to retrain America, I believe, and we must fundamentally reform and simplify government, because it is literally crushing the life out of this economy and out of people who are trying to fulfill their potential in this economy. And the final thing I would just say before I pass it on to my other colleagues is that I do think that, Senator DeMint spoke eloquently about what unites Americans. He spoke eloquently about opportunity for all and favoritism for none. And I think one of the things that unites Americans is I think Americans believe we are now losing something important. And I think what they think we're losing is a sense of limitless possibility. If you look at the polls, what you see is Americans think they don't have limitless possibilities in their lives anymore. Their children don't. We used to be a nation where people thought, I can do what I want. And our nation, if it can be done, our nation is going to do it. We're losing that. And it's tragic, and it has economic consequences and consequences in people's lives. And I think what Americans think we're missing is leadership. The leadership that recognizes that everyone does have a potential, everyone does deserve a chance. We save lives when we provide jobs and training. Every wound we have in this nation is self-inflicted. We can solve every problem, but we have to start by recognizing the most important resource we have, and that is human potential. It is limitless. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Carly. Appreciate it very much. I want to go out of order for 1 second. My pal Jimmy Pethokoukis, just following on Carly's remarks, you have written a lot of good stuff on the decline of America's startup rate, which really, I think, quantitatively is the most productive form of job creation, actual startups. Why is that? What's going on there?
Well, first, thanks to the Heritage Foundation for inviting someone from the American Enterprise Institute to come here. I appreciate it. And also, let me follow what Larry said about Dr. Laffer here. I think when high school students, 100 years from now, when they learn about economics or have it downloaded into their heads or whatever we do 100 years from now, I think and they hear about 20th century, they're going to hear about John Maynard Keynes, of course, Milton Friedman, and Art Laffer. Absolutely. I'm on the stage with what I feel is a world historical figure who came on the scene when the United States was on the verge of going into permanent decline. That was a hinge of history moment in 1980, and I'm, again, honored to be on the stage with Art Laffer. The startups, I have written a lot about what's going on, and when I write about startups, people kind of think, well, is that really that important of an issue? There, I use Google and Facebook and Twitter. It seems like startups are doing great. I mean, everywhere I look, I see, and there's new, web applications, and it looks really well, except when you actually look at the numbers, where we've seen a steady erosion in the number of new businesses that have been started up over the past 30 years. Now, that in itself may or may not be a bad thing. One reason is that we have a lot of big box retailing stores, which have pushed out a lot of the mom and pop stores, which is not so good for the mom and pop stores, but it's really good for consumers. Also, people who work at those big box retailers get paid higher wages, so you have higher wages for those workers, and people get less expensive goods. So that's great. So that may explain part of it. But we're also seeing a decline, not just in startups overall, but also in sort of the high-tech startups overall, kind of the fastest growing, what business consultants might call gazelles, very fast-growing firms. And that's extremely important and worrisome, because that's where not only do they create a lot of jobs, they create a lot of innovation, the new products, goods, services, and a lot of good, middle-class jobs. We've had kind of this job polarization in this country over the past 20 years, a lot of jobs at both ends, not so much in the middle. But startups, in addition to being, supplying the innovation, also serve another extraordinarily important function, is they provide competitive intensity with big companies. Big companies have a choice. If you have a startup coming at you, you can do two things. One, you can try to innovate, or you can go out of business. No, wait. There's a third thing you can do. You can hire a lobbyist. You can go to Washington D.C. and you can try to get a tax break or a regulation to give you some sort of advantage with that startup. So I think, and I'm supposedly writing a book on this, is that decline in startups and the entrepreneurial, which Carly mentioned, is extraordinarily important, because that's our big advantage. The United States. We always talk about Scandinavia. We don't want to become like Scandinavia, a social democracy. Guess what? We are a social democracy with a huge welfare state. Sometimes we hide it through various sort of tax subsidies, but we have a huge welfare state in this country. And our only edge over those countries is our entrepreneurial sector and being extraordinarily innovative. In fact, those countries couldn't do what they do if not for our innovations, which they're able to use. They have open economies. So I think looking at sort of the dynamism in the U.S. economy and the decline in dynamism is a lens through which I hope the next Congress looks at all their policies.
And before we get to Art on the growth question, is there, Jimmy, a single overriding wet blanket that's preventing these startups?
Actually, I mean, there's a lot of research going on it. Could it be just that we're an older country, so you get an older country that tend to be less dynamic, less entrepreneurial? That may play a role. Do I think our tax structure and regulation? In fact, I'm at the Heritage Foundation AI. We do a ton of work on taxes, and the whole sort of center-right movement is focused, rightly so, on taxes for 30 years. But we also have to remember regulation. And I can't say here that this one particular regulation is killing American dynamism, but any time Congress passes a regulation, again, one lens through which we should examine the regulation is, does it make it harder to start, not just start a business, but grow that business, and does it give an edge to an incumbent company?
Thank you. Let me go to Art Laffer.
Just add one I know I'm out of order here, but just, it's worth noting that 70% of small business owners describe the federal government as hostile to them.
Wow.
So is there one single regulation? No, but have we ever repealed a regulation in 40 years? Not that I'm aware of. So you add all that up, that's a pretty heavy burden. That's a pretty heavy burden.
So Art, Jimmy and Carly mentioned tax reform as one of the issues. I hear a lot of talk about it. I don't see a lot of specifics about it. The Laffer curve taught us a lot, and the growth in the 80s and 90s, I think, had much to do with broad-based tax reform, lower rates, broader base. What are you thinking here? What should we be doing? Which direction should we go, and what should we be doing?
First thing, if I could just add to Carly's comment that 70% find the federal government hostile. The other 30% are selling to the federal government. And sorry, I just had to add that. And that percentage is going up from a much smaller base. But let me, if I can, we've had lots and lots of years of experience here in this country. We have 175 other countries for which we have enormous reservoir data. We have 50 states that have been performing experiments over the last 75 years. We've got huge amounts of experiential base on which to look at success and failure in economies. If you look at them, my sort of conclusion comes out that, to have success, what you need is a 5-point program. Number one, a low-rate, broad-based tax system where you replace all existing taxes and put them into a low-rate, broad-based, and I'll come back to that for a second. You need spending restraint. As Milton Friedman taught us, government spending is taxation. The tooth fairy no longer works at the U.S. Treasury. Every dollar they spend, they take from someone else, so it is a tax expenditure process. Low-rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money. There's nothing that can bring an economy to its knees quicker than an unsound monetary system. When we came into office on January 20th, 1981, some of you may remember, the prime interest rate in this wonderful country of ours was 21.5%. We had double-digit inflation. Killers. So low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, free trade. There are some things we do better than foreigners. There are some things foreigners do better than we do. We and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those products we make better than they do in exchange for those products they make better than we do. It's a win-win. It's called the gains from trade, comparative advantage, David Ricardo. I don't care what you call it, but free trade is essential to economic growth. And lastly, minimal regulations. We all know we need regulations, but what you want to make sure you don't do is go beyond the specific purpose at hand and create a system of regulations that has a whole mess of collateral damage. No one would suggest you should be able to wake up in the morning and decide which side of the right road you're going to drive on today. You need regulations, but they have to be very focused and directed. Now, if I can, on the low-rate, broad-based, flat tax, and I want to mix a little politics into it, those are the 5 things: low-rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, free trade, minimal regulations. Then the government should get the hell out of the way and let the private sector solve the problems. And I mean, get out of the way. You shouldn't be picking winners or losers and losers. That's not the government's role. When you look at low-rate, broad-based, flat tax, I did Jerry Brown's flat tax when he ran for president in 1992 against Bill Clinton. He replaced all federal taxes except for sin taxes, which are a little teeny tiny, for 2 flat rate taxes, a 12.8% tax on personal unadjusted gross income, and a 12.8% flat tax on business net sales, or you may want to call it value added, that's fine. But a flat rate tax across the board on the first dollar to the last dollar. If you did that, you would match all revenue, static revenue neutrality, no Laffer curve effect or anything in that, at full employment with a 12.8% flat tax. Can you imagine what would happen to the U.S. if that's what we had? Was a low-rate, broad-based flat tax. You wouldn't even have to pay taxes. You can get rid of the IRS. The government owes you $100. It gives you 87 It's $87.20, and you don't even have to report. Now, if you mow your neighbor's lawn for $10, yes, you're going to have to send in 12.8% of that. But it would be just amazing on the politics of it. The closest we came was in 1980s. Now, I told you about Jerry Brown's. He came in second in the race, and I will tell you, we would have taken Clinton out in the primary. Now, this is the Democratic primary. This is not Republican. We would have taken Clinton out, except 3 weeks before the New York primary. Jerry Brown announced that he was going to have Jesse Jackson as his running mate. Our political successes evaporated moments thereafter. But it's still, just so you know, Jerry Brown had the second most number of delegates in the Democratic primary in 1992 on that flat tax. The Democrats like it. The 86 Tax Act. Let me tell you what we did in the 86 Tax Act, just for politics. We cut the highest marginal income tax rate in America from 50% to 28%. Good enough cut for you? 50 to 28%. Just in case we missed a couple of people, we cut the corporate rate from 46% to 34%. You follow me? We raised the lowest rate from 12.5% to 15%. We got rid of a lot of deductions, exemptions, and exclusions, so it was statically revenue neutral. But that's what we did. Lowered the highest rate from 50 to 28, lowered the highest corporate rate from 46 to 34, and we replaced 14 tax brackets with 2 tax brackets, 15% and 28%. That's it. The vote in the U.S. Senate. This bill passed. Now, can you imagine that vote today? That bill passed. The vote was 97-3. 97. 3 Democrats voted against it. Simon from Illinois, Melchior, and Levin, who just left the Senate, just leaving it right now. I mean, we got people like Alan Cranston and Metzenbaum and Teddy Kennedy and Bill Bradley and Dick Durbin and Harry Reid and Joe Biden. They all voted. Why did they vote for it? Al Gore voted for it. Why? Because they know it's right. If you go back and read their press releases, this was the pro-growth agenda. That's what we need to do. It can be done. And my motto in all of this stuff, and I'll stop here, is don't just stand there. Undo something. Get rid of the damage, the overhang here, and that should be our prime agenda, is undoing stuff and letting this wonderful country that Carly talks about solve its own problems.
Arthur, why can't we get that done now?
We can. We will.
Tax reform?
It's done. We are today right in the middle of 1978. We just won the elections massively. It took Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan, and it honestly did. And in the same breath that it took Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan, you cannot imagine the great president who's going to follow Barack Obama.
Steve Moore, let's pick it up. If you want to talk some more about tax reform, go right ahead. There are other issues. It looks to me, judging from the White House, that President Obama is going to come out against the Keystone XL pipeline. Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York State, I read in this morning's paper, has now come out against fracking in New York State, largely on the recommendations of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Yoko Ono, who have been his energy advisors. And
it's Ono-onomics, right?
Ono-onomics, right. These are right people with long-held experience in the energy field. So what's going to happen when Obama finds a way to knock out the Keystone Pipeline, and what are the Republicans going to do about it, and what should they do about it?
So energy is the biggest story of the American economy. There's unquestionably true. I wanted to just back up for a minute, though, and get to your point, Larry, that you made at the outset of this about 4% growth. How do we get back on that 4% growth path? We had that throughout most of the 1980s and 1990s, and I would say that one of the contributions, to use that word advisedly, of Barack Obama is that he has really set up this interesting experiment, a kind of real-life experiment about these two competing models that we've been talking about. The Keynesian model of government spending and government activism as a stimulus, and the Reagan model of unleashing the supply side of the economy and private businesses. And this is an important point, Larry, that we have to hammer home, because this lesson has to be learned it's never going to be learned by academics, but I think the American people are starting to understand this. So let me just give you one amazing statistic. Reagan came in, period of incredible economic crisis, as Arthur just described, but Barack Obama came into office during a period of great economic crisis, no question about it. Here is the amazing thing. And by the way, as you all know, they used diametrically opposite approaches, Larry, to dealing with the crisis. As you just said, Arthur, Reagan cut tax rates, he deregulated key parts of the economy, he got government spending under control, he let the private businesses that Carly is talking about rebuild our economy. Obama came in, what was it, $870 billion stimulus plan with this so-called multiplier effect. We had Obamacare, we had tax increases on the rich. What I'm saying, Larry, is that Barack Obama's pretty much thrown the entire Keynesian playbook at this recession, not least of all the $3 or $4 trillion of money creation. Now, here's the amazing thing. If you compare the records of these two presidents, and this is something that drives people on the left crazy, they hate this comparison, but it's a very apt one, that in the 5.5 years of the start of the Reagan recovery versus the first 5.5 years of the Obama recovery, the U.S. economy grew at just over 4%, 4.1% in the first 5.5 years under Reagan, and it grew just about exactly 2% under Obama. Now, that may not seem like a big difference, the difference between 4.1 and 2, but it is enormous because of the compounding effect of this. And so the growth deficit, and this, Carly, in my opinion, has to be a huge mantra of pro-growth Republicans, is that we are now facing an economic growth deficit. And that deficit, Larry, is now $2 trillion. And what that $2 trillion number means is if the economy had grown as fast in Barack Obama's first 5.5 years of recovery as it did under Ronald Reagan's first 5.5 years of recovery, we would have $2 trillion more GDP. Now, imagine how much better off the American people would be today if we had $2 trillion more output. Larry, if you took that amount and just prorated it to every family in America, that's $15,000 more income. And here is the key, and this is something that came through, through loud and clear during the midterm elections that we just had. The American people, you said this last night, Carly, the American people are angry. And I would say they are filled with anxiety as well, anger and anxiety that they're not seeing the kind of middle class increases, and not just jobs, but incomes. So here's one other statistic I'll throw out just for discussion. The average family in America, the median family, I'm not talking about poor families, the average middle class family since this recovery began, not since the recession, since the recovery began, has lost $1,600 in income. That's devastating. That's why, when Barack Obama goes around and Paul Krugman says how wonderful things are, Americans just don't believe it. Now, just very quickly on this energy story, I'll simply say this, that it was, if we were sitting here 7 years ago, and I told you all that America is going to go through the biggest economic boom in the history of this country, and we're going to, within, by the end of the decade, be energy independent, and we're going to see, oil prices down to, who knows how low they're going to go. They're at, $52 a barrel today. You would have thought I was crazy. And it was just as recently as a few years ago, Larry, that Barack Obama was running around the country saying that America's running out of oil and gas. Ladies and gentlemen, America is not running out of oil and gas. We're running into it in a big, big way. And the dividend of this, the growth dividend of this is so enormous, Larry. And I get so angry at some of your friends on Wall Street who are peddling the story that somehow falling oil prices are bad for the world economy. It's craziness. I mean, this is a story that pumps hundreds of billions of dollars of real stimulus into the economy. When commodity prices fall and energy is cheaper, it's good for our manufacturing sector, our transportation.
Wait a minute. Everybody on CNBC, I basically argue this, 4 days a week or however much they put me on anymore. I am told by some of the best portfolio managers, and particularly hedge fund managers, all right? My favorite are the hedge fund managers, who basically missed a 4 or 5 year stock market rally here. So they got a lot of shorts. By the way, the shorts recovered yesterday as the Dow went up 300 points, but that's another subject. They tell me it's bad. It's bad because, first of all, you can't make any money at $55, $60 a barrel. No money to be made. All right? Even though at the wellhead, we're producing fracked oil at about $30 a barrel, all right, plus transportation costs. All right, that's bad. They can't make any money. They're over-leveraged. Their junk bonds are going to collapse. The banks have made leveraged loans, and the whole banking system is going to collapse. And this is really 2008 one guy accused me of not understanding that. She said, just like you didn't in 2008.
So these are the people who want oil to go back up to $200 a barrel,
It's
right?
hard to know how high, but they are convinced that we are now going to have a systemic banking / energy / junk bond global default.
Well,
That's how horrible
Yeah.
low energy. And
So-
my last point is I want to ask everybody,
Larry, that's great news. You and I will be on TV a lot more.
listen, they're going to haul us out. They've been hauling us out there. I asked them just if they drive cars, and many of the hedge funds do. Not all of them. They are driven, but many of the hedge funds drive cars. And I said, when you go to the gas station, which is about $2 a gallon, do you see a lot of motorists weeping at the new gas prices? All right, and that's just, come on, Larry, you're being silly. So I just want to ask you, how do you know that lower oil prices are good? How do you know that these hedge fund guys aren't right?
well, to argue that low oil, oil and gas prices is bad for the economy because it hurts, the hedge funds is like saying, rising life expectancy is a bad thing because it hurts people who run funeral parlors. I mean, there's always some people who are losers in this, but what I'm saying is, some of my friends are in the oil and gas industry, and they're going to struggle, and some of them are going to go out of business, but every other industry, I mean, what's going on in this country is there's a manufacturing renaissance in America today because we have the lowest energy prices in the world. So my only point, I don't want to hog the microphone, I'll just end this by saying this: the shale oil and gas revolution is transforming this country, it's transforming the world economy, it is not going away, this is the tip of an iceberg. And Carly, this gets to your point about human ingenuity and innovation. This whole story of shale oil and gas, it's all about innovation and technology.
All about innovation.
Exactly.
All about innovators who actually bucked the system.
You know what? And that's such a great point. And you know what's so great? I just love this story, Larry. When it's not Exxon, it wasn't Mobil, it wasn't Chevron. These were these small wildcatters who
There
went
were
out there and
small
found this.
wildcatters who were tough as nails and said, we can figure out how to do this. And
So,
they did it.
yeah. So just to,
By the way, they did it in Texas because it was an environment that let them.
So just to finish the point, just very quickly. So yeah, this is a huge story. The Democrats are completely on the wrong side of this. I mean, here we are in the biggest oil and gas revolution in the history of the world, and they're talking about windmills. I mean, it's craziness. And the Republicans have to drive this message. They have to talk about pipelines. They have to talk about something you talk a lot about, which is overturning the ban on the export of American oil and
Yep,
gas.
yep.
And I'll add one other thing, Larry. They have to take on the radical Greens in this country that are anti-growth, anti-development, and anti-progress. And if you do those things, this can drive a real expansion.
And
The guy who, just one last, the guy who is weeping over the decline in oil prices, who's probably close to a nervous breakdown right now, is Vladimir Putin.
Exactly.
Right. Now,
Exactly.
I would, there are a lot of scholars here, so correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a foreign policy guy, but if Vladimir Putin goes down, would that not be a good thing for America? Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm very naive about these things.
Yeah, not just Vladimir Putin, but ISIS. I mean, ISIS gets $5 million a day from petrodollars. We can defund our enemies. So this is obviously a national security issue.
And Iran.
Yep.
Yes.
And Iran.
Yeah.
I know the Saudis act in their self-interest. And they want market share because Nigeria and other places are discounting like crazy. But Carly, I think the Saudis gave us one on this. I really do. I think that they don't like Putin, they don't like Iran, and that was part of their decision not to try to meddle with the market.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think the Saudis understand that oil and oil prices are a strategic weapon, and they used it that way.
Now, so I want to ask you, again, I want to come back to regulation and taxes in a minute. So I want to ask you, hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling are technology breakthroughs, as you noted, Steve noted. I kind of look at this as tech breakthroughs that happen to be in the energy business. Aren't these principles going to be applied in other areas of the economy?
Of course, and that's why it is so distressing that we are making innovation and entrepreneurship more difficult.
Right.
Because it transforms every industry. I mentioned that small businesses is a fact. Small businesses innovate at 7 times the rate of big businesses. There's a reason for that. Innovation, I was very proud when we were at Hewlett-Packard, by the end of my tenure, we were generating 11 patents a day. Okay, it's a rapid rate of innovation, but imagine the small business, the startups, the gazelles innovate at 7 times that rate. Why does that happen? It's not by accident. Innovation requires risk-taking. Risk-taking requires flexibility, ingenuity, creativity. Those things are more difficult in big bureaucracies. They're impossible in big government bureaucracies. But they're also actually more difficult in big companies with a lot of rules and procedures. You need the dynamism, the flexibility to have entrepreneurship and innovation. Absolutely, innovation is transforming every industry. And one of the things that we ought to think about as a nation when we think about giving everyone a chance, when we think about providing jobs and opportunity for everyone, when we think about economic leadership in the 21st century, we have to be the innovation leader, we have to continue to be the entrepreneurial leader in the nation, but we also have to lead in the industries that will define this century. And we know what those industries are. Energy is one. Biotech is another. Aerospace, yes, we need to be landing things on meteorites, actually. All of those industries are going to, and of course, information technology, social media. Those 4, and there are others, but those 4 in particular are going to define this century. And we have to lead in those. And we're beginning to lead in energy, yay, no thanks to the Obama administration. We continue to lead in information technology. We need to lead in aerospace, space technology, biotechnology, health tech as well. And innovation will transform them all and is transforming them all. But we are making it far more difficult. One last thing on the Keystone XL pipeline, if I may. I think President Obama and the left's continued obstructionism with the Keystone XL pipeline is an example of their hypocrisy.
Right.
The facts are clear. If you are truly worried about greenhouse gas emissions, what we are doing today, that is transporting by rail crude, that is worse for the environment, far worse for the environment than the Keystone XL pipeline. But never mind, they say. Never mind, they say. This is the triumph of ideology over economic growth. It is the triumph of liberals saying, you know what, we're prepared to sacrifice your livelihood, your life, at the altar of our ideology. And let's not forget, these poor coal mining communities in Kentucky and West Virginia, where drug abuse is now at 40%, the community has been destroyed because liberal ideologues have said, we don't like how you make a living. And innovation can make coal mining, is making coal mining safer and cleaner as well. And no matter how many families whose livelihoods we destroy in West Virginia, the Chinese are going to continue to burn coal.
Jimmy, Harold Hamm, the leader of the North Dakota Bakken fracking, told me that as they went in there and bought up land, they made a lot of little small dirt farmers a lot of money. They had a lot of millionaires, created a lot of millionaires in fracking, which I guess in America today is a bad thing. But he also gave a lot of jobs to, field hands and roustabouts and people who have to operate these fields. So my question to you is, if fracking creates, let's say, $80,000 a year jobs, and what the BLS said, waitresses in North Dakota are making $35,000 a year, pretty good money. Prior to that, they were unemployed, so they're working. But there are more millionaires, which is creating more income inequality. Now, the way I look at it is a rising tide lifts all boats. But I'm an antique. I'm a dinosaur. That was Reagan talk. That was John F. Kennedy talk. We're all happier because we're all working. But scholars at, heaven forbid, other left-wing think tanks are telling me that inequality is growing, and that's bad, and your friend Thomas Piketty wants to tax everybody at 80%. You've written a lot about that. So what's the answer here?
I think there's two kinds of inequality. I think there's a kind we should be concerned about, and maybe a kind we should be less concerned about. I think if someone's a billionaire and she became a billionaire because they thought of a great idea, some great new service, new product, that's fantastic. I mean, I think we want those sort of billionaire entrepreneurs. And the U.S., despite the fact we've sort of been, bad-mouthed the U.S. innovation dynamism, we actually have, for a big advanced economy, more of those as a share of, given they have a much bigger population, than any other big economy in the world. More than Germany. At the other end of the spectrum, it'd be like France. They don't get a lot of billionaire entrepreneurs.
They've all left.
They've all left. They've come here. Or Switzerland. Switzerland has a lot, and so does Hong Kong. So that's good. We want policies that can create more billionaire entrepreneurs. Not because I really care so much that they have $1 billion or $50 billion, but all the other good spillover effects, like all those jobs Larry just spoke about. But if that wealth inequality is because you work in an industry that's protected by government in some way, so it can get very, very big, or somehow you're able to negotiate a really great pay package that has no link to your actual performance. That kind of inequality, I'm a lot more worried about. So when we talk about innovation and dynamism, and I know it's a theme, a lot of people know I've been talking about is crony capitalism. If the reason we have inequality, or one of the reasons, is because there's a lot more cronyism in the economy, whether, for instance, because we still have a too-big-to-fail financial system, where banks are actually now bigger than they were before the financial crisis, and if something happens to one of these big banks or multiple banks, despite what's on the books, we will bail these banks out again. That's the history of banking. The government always blinks when a big bank's about to go under, almost always. So that's the kind of inequality and cronyism that I'm worried about.
Arthur, do you think the 12.8% flat tax, I'm going to stay with this inequality, but I want to move it back into the framework of reforms you were talking about. 12.8% flat tax for everybody would be a substantial tax cut for the rich, quote unquote. That's the argument. There are people on the left, of course, most people on the left oppose that. There are even some conservatives now who oppose cutting the top tax rate. What's your feeling about that? The argument of taxing the rich, redistributing income and wealth inequality, and how does that tie into the flat tax?
Let me, if I can, again, just say that we have tons of data. The IRS is extraordinarily competent in finding out where everyone who has any money exists. In fact, the first publication in the English language, well, not in the English language, but in Great Britain, was the Doomsday Book, which was the collection of taxes in Great Britain for the king, so we could find out where everyone had what. We have tremendous records on income tax returns, starting with the income tax in 1913. No, I will cede right now that when we went from a 0 tax on the rich to a 7% tax on the rich, revenues actually went up on those people who were rich. I'll concede that. Just joking. We have records there. By 1919, the highest marginal income tax rate had risen to 77%. The race in 1920 was a lowering the rate between Cox and Roosevelt versus Harding and Coolidge. We cut the rate from 77% to 25%. Is that a good enough cut for you on the rich? The share of income taxes paid by the top 1% as a share of GDP went through the roof during the 1920s. We had a beautiful economy. Then in the Great Depression, we went from a 25% tax rate up to a 92% tax rate. Tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners actually declined during this period. It was the longest, deepest recession in U.S. history, in my view, because of higher tax rates. Then you have the period of Kennedy cutting the highest tax rate, which you're writing about, Larry, cutting the highest rate from 91% to 70%. Plus, he put in the investment tax credit, accelerated depreciation. He cut taxes on traded products. He cut the corporate rate from 52 to 48%. He was a tax-cutting, supply-siding crazy guy. Tax revenues from the top 1% of the income earners went way up during the during the go-go 60s. Then we had the Four Stooges, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. The largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance probably ever put on planet Earth. They raised taxes. You remember all those taxes there through Carter, and tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners actually went down during that period. We had a depression, slowdown, terrible 16 years. Then, of course, we came to the period, excuse me, does anybody need water? No, I'm just joking, just joking. The skies opened, the sun shone down, and Ronald Reagan was nominated and elected. Oh, be still my heart. We cut tax rates on everything that jumped, walked, crawled, earned income, didn't earn. I mean, we just cut them all over the place. If you look at revenues from the top 1% of income earners, they went from 1.5% of GDP in, I think, 1978, just before Steiger-Hansen, to 3.7% of GDP. The top 1% paid that with massive tax rate reductions. I mean, it's just incredible. And the boom of all booms occurred. That's what I want to see, Larry. Now, let me, if I can, say to this, and I want to emphasize it here, it's not Republican or Democrat. It's not left-wing or right-wing. It's not liberal or conservative. It's economics. This stuff is independent of your ideology. Economics is all about incentives. If you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, do I need to say the next sentence to you? You're going to get a lot of people not working. If you tax rich people and give the money to poor people, you're going to get lots and lots of poor people and no rich people. If you have two locations, A and B, if you raise taxes in B and you lower them in A, producers and manufacturers and people are going to move from to. It's economics. Raising tax rates in the rich costs us revenues, period. That is the one area everyone agrees to. It does. Lowering tax rates on the rich actually provides a lot more revenues, and that is exactly what we need, Larry. We need a low-rate flat tax to bring this system into providing the most revenues we need in the least damaging fashion to the economy, and then hopefully we can get to the spending those monies in the best way possible to create growth and prosperity, rather than in all the paying people not to work and not to produce.
Jim Pethokoukis, you have a different view. You want the Republicans to avoid tax cuts on the top end rich, and you want to focus them on the middle class directly, and others, so-called conservative reformers, do. It's a legitimate disagreement. How do you respond to Art Laffer, and why is your program more efficient?
I think, well, for folks on the right, and for all Americans, we've had a tremendous victory on taxes over the past 30 years, where we've gone from a 70% top tax rate and a tax code that wasn't indexed for inflation to one that is indexed for inflation. And even now, after the Obama tax hikes, it's at 40%, the top personal income tax rate. So I am all for dropping that top tax rate. But when you look at where taxes were then, where they are now, and the fact that, 45% of Americans don't pay personal income taxes, and the fact that we're not at 70% anymore, and the growth gains that we get by dropping it from 40 to, I don't know where some House Republicans want to put it, 25, 28% back where it was in the 1920s. I think that the factors you have to take into account are, one, most Americans aren't going to get a tax cut, all right? During the Reagan tax cuts, Americans got tax cuts. Most Americans, or a good chunk of Americans, aren't going to get a tax cut. This is going to be a revenue loser, and which maybe I wouldn't care so much if we were at debt as share of GDP at 25% as opposed to 75%. So you're going to lose revenue. You're not going to give a good chunk of the American people a tax cut. And if I was going to come out of the box with a growth plan, with the number one thing I come out of the box with, be cutting taxes for high-end taxes for wealthy Americans who've been doing very well. A fascinating poll, which I've been sort of just dug up here while you guys were talking. It's a good poll, came out over the summer. They asked folks, what do you prefer? Focusing on economic growth or increasing income inequality? And here's some really good news. By 80% to 16%, people prefer candidates who want economic growth versus less income inequality, which I think is a great statistic. Likewise, by 62% to 33%, they prefer candidates focused on economic growth to provide more opportunities versus a candidate who want to focus on economic justice, leveling the playing field. All right, so that's, which I also think is very, very encouraging. But then they ask these exact same people, all right, you want economic growth, you want opportunity. What policies do you think will get you opportunity? The number one policy, well, that's pretty good. Reduce regulation on business. Excellent. That's what we've been talking about. Next, increase the minimum wage. That's at 58%. Guarantee all workers a living wage, 57%. Cut taxes on high-end income and job creators, 40%. Cut taxes on high-income earners, 36%. I'm more interested in the policy than the politics and the messaging. But I think given the fact that middle-income taxpayers have not had a raise in years, and I think that the corporate tax code is actually in a much worse shape than the personal income tax code, I would like to see Republicans, or anybody else who wants to bring up the idea, come out of the box with a set of policies, directly address the everyday concerns of middle-class voters, which includes getting a good job, but also includes their take-home pay, also includes whether they can send their kids to college without saddling them with enormous debt. Those are the policies I'd like to focus on. So I think coming out, again, having your lead idea be cutting the top personal tax rate, I'm not sure that would be number one on my priority list.
Let me just follow up, and I want everybody to react. You also propose, you and others propose a significant, I guess, $2,500 increase in the child tax credit. Is that the middle class tax cut that you think will work? And I want to put the politics aside for a second. In economic terms, is that an economic?
I think it is indisputable that if you let people keep, and this is a tax credit which will be applied to both against your income and your payroll taxes.
And refundable?
It's not refundable. You have to make some money.
Okay.
You got to make some money.
Makes a difference.
That it is indisputable that if you allow people to keep more money, they will have more money. Right? I mean, I don't have a PhD, but if you let people keep more money, they will have more money, and I think that's a good thing. That they can spend on childcare, or they can spend on getting their kid tutoring if one of them has trouble in math, or for a college education. I think expand the child tax. I mean, as part of a broader portfolio of a pro-middle class agenda, when combined with the sorts of deregulation, and I think business tax reform, I think that's a very powerful agenda, not just for economic growth, but also appealing, and for politics, to middle-class America, who basically think Republicans have nothing to offer them, thought Mitt Romney didn't care, showed no empathy for them. And I think the Republican presidential nominee in 2016, if voters go in the voting booth and they think, this is the man or woman who their big priority is cutting taxes on the job creators and high-end and wealthy people, hoping that they'll work more and invest more, I think that's a political loser. And I think just on economic grounds, it's not a top priority.
All right.
Yeah, I just think, I'll take you back to Jerry Brown, the Democratic primaries, ultra-lefties in the Democratic primaries. We were going to beat the tar out of Bill Clinton by having a flat tax and lowering rates on the highest income earners and raising rates on the lowest and having a flat tax. People understand a flat tax is fair, it's correct. If you make 10 times as much as I do, you should pay 10 times as much in taxes as I do. But that's what it is. When you get into this fuzzy-wuzzy land, you really don't have a standard. That is a good standard there. It gets rid of all the bureaucracy, et cetera. But I don't want to go much further.
Why didn't people flock to the Romney tax cut plan, which
Romney was
28%? Just that he was a bad messenger?
No, he wasn't a bad messenger. If you read the whole plan, it was just terrible. Romney wanted to do tax cuts for people other than wealthy people. He had separate provisions in there. They wanted to increase the progressivity of the tax codes. And for my work, I did vote for Romney, but that was not because I thought Romney was any good. I voted for him because I thought Obama was worse. But the truth of the matter is we haven't had a pro-growth agenda in a long time, since Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton was one of the best presidents we've ever had, and I always have to say this, one of the most disgusting people we've ever had. But a great president. I voted for him twice.
Do you think cutting the top tax rate from where it is currently to Calvin Coolidge levels, would lose revenue?
Well, I would cut
Do you
it
think
to.
it would lose revenue?
I would cut it to Ronald Reagan levels. Oh, it would raise revenues. They're cutting the highest rate. But I want to have a flat tax.
Do you think we're on the wrong side of the Great Laugher curve?
Oh, on the rich people, clearly we are. Look at Warren Buffett. He pays 6/100% of his income in taxes because it all has it all in unrealized capital gains, gifts to his family foundations, you name it. He doesn't pay taxes. You go to the top 100, 500 people, they're all got their income in unrealized capital gains. They all have their 501c3s, excuse me, for both of your foundations.
No,
But I mean,
please.
forgive me. But you know, what you do is get rid of all that stuff and have a low rate so it doesn't matter. We all make choices based upon what we think is right, not because of our tax stuff. I mean, you know, it's really wrong to tell people, if you spend 40% of your money in taxes, you'll spend 40% of your time trying to avoid them. Get that rate way down there so people can lose their interest in their taxes, and don't look for lawyers, accountants, deferred income specialists, and favor grabbers, and let them try to make money and grow this economy.
Do you think telling a voter that here's what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut the top tax rate
And
on
raise
people
the lowest.
who've been doing very well, and by the way, I'm not cutting taxes for you, and as some people on the right would do, for that 45% who aren't paying taxes. You have to contribute. So I'm actually
No,
going
come
to
on.
raise your taxes. So that's a wonderful strategy.
But I want a static revenue neutral.
Missing something in this argument. I think we can argue about the rates, but at least half the problem with our tax code is its complexity allows people to game the system. The tax code is used
By the
to
rich people
create,
especially.
absolutely, but by big companies as well. The tax code is used to further certain people's interests. It just is. So we have to fundamentally reform the tax code, not just in terms of its rates, yes, absolutely in terms of its rates, but in terms of its complexity. And I also think that we get it wrong when we say that as a requirement for tax reform, my view of tax reform, it is fundamental simplification of the tax code, as well as a discussion of what the rates should be. But I think we miss something when we say, you know, whatever we put forward should be revenue neutral. Let me just say, this government takes in too much money. And the only way to begin fundamental reform of government, fundamental simplification of government, fundamental focus on performance in government instead of just out of control growth year after year after year, regardless of who's in charge, is to actually start sending less money to Washington. How many people, I mean, you all know this, but I started my career in Washington, D.C., working for AT&T after I finally went off and got an MBA after becoming a secretary, and I sold to the federal government. And anyone who's done business with the federal government knows that in the last 6 weeks of each and every fiscal year, every government agency spends every dime they're entitled to, whether they need to or not. And they do so because they want to make sure that the appropriations process is focused on the rate of increase for the following year.
You mean it doesn't work that
Not
way in
what have you
business?
actually spent or whether you actually need to spend it. So if we're going to reform the tax code, let's start with the principle that we must fundamentally simplify it, get it as simple as possible, and let's actually have the debate about whether it needs to be revenue neutral at all, or whether we actually should start down a process of having government spend less.
Larry, you know, we've done some polling at Heritage on the subject of tax reform because we think it's the #1 issue for economic growth. And Carly, I think you're really onto something here. I mean, when we do these polls, what we're finding is when you ask people about tax reform, the one word that comes shining through, and we might not like this, the word people want from the tax system is fairness. Fairness.
Sure.
Now,
That doesn't surprise me.
what that means we have to do is define for people what fairness means.
But
And
what most people know, sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but what most people know in their bones is if it's so complicated that I can't understand it,
Right.
it's not fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? Most people know that. If I can understand it, I can figure out whether it's fair or not. If I can't understand it unless I have 100
And-
accountants on my payroll, it ain't fair.
And they also think, you're exactly right, and they also think somebody else is getting something. You know, they
And
see.
they're right.
And you know, these rich people are getting off, not paying a lot, or this company isn't paying what they should be. And I've really come to the conclusion, if you're going to do a big change in the tax system, precisely because of where you've all been talking about in this discussion, you got to do the big bang. You've got to just, you know, you've got to just blow up the system, start over. What's interesting about the last presidential election, the one thing that people remember about the last, you know, the Republicans had a pretty lousy field last time. But what was the one thing people remember about that field? 9, 9,
Yeah.
9. And they remember that because I think you might have had a hand in that one, Arthur. It's just a variation of these themes, but people want something that's understandable. They think everybody's going to pay their fair share, is pro-growth. And I'll just add one other thing. Given the scandals we've had over the last year, dramatically reduces the role of the IRS in our lives.
By the way, I want to get to we got an email coming about the fair tax. The earned income tax credit, which I generally favor, along with the child tax credit, are two of the highest fraud tax parts of the IRS system. I was reading, this surprised me, I didn't know that much about it. The child tax credit, in fact, has definitional problems. People are not even sure the definition of children, particularly when it comes to things like adoption or abandonment, for example. And we'll get into the breakup of families in a little while. So those are issues. Steve, I know you've, in your distant dark past, you have flirted with the fair tax, national sales tax. I think you've overcome that, but I want to get some specificity because we've got an emailer. Dave Camp has introduced the Tax Reform Act of 2014, blah, blah, blah. He thinks it's a Band-Aid for tax reform. This person wants us to push the Fair Tax Act, H.R. 25, which would be a 131-page bill that has been buried under the table. And the IRS needs to be abolished, and the fair tax accomplishes this. My only point, I always thought the fair tax was the flip side of the near tax to arts flat tax. But putting that aside, if we had a fair tax, would we abolish the IRS? I don't think so, because you have so many complications with the fair tax. You're gonna have give-ups and carve-outs and poor people and whatnot. Are you still on the fair tax thing?
Look, I actually think I like the idea of a national consumption tax. Yeah, I really do. I mean, and I do think it would mean every time you go to, you don't have to fill out a 1040 form. The IRS doesn't have to monitor how much income you make. You just pay your tax at the cash register. Whether that's achievable right now, probably not. I like Arthur's idea much more of some kind of a flat tax system. And by the way, Arthur, at some point that might be the stepping stone to just moving to a consumption tax. As you know, Larry, Arthur and I have done a lot of research on the states. And we've got a nice little experiment here, right, Arthur? We've got a lot of states that tax on the sales, on the consumption. A lot of states like New York and Connecticut and New Jersey and my home state of Illinois and your state you ran for Senate in California that have high income tax rates. And we find pretty conclusively, Larry, that states that tax consumption and don't have these high taxes on, and by the way, when we talk about that top 1 or 2 or 3%, with all due respect to my good friend Jimmy P., let's remember who those people are. They are the employers in this country. They're the people that create the jobs. I mean, that's a really important thing. You know, my old boss, Dick Armour, used to say, liberals love employers, but they hate jobs. I mean, they hate, yeah, they love jobs, but they hate employers. You can't have one without the other. And if you want to have more jobs, because I view the problem that you identified, Jimmy, as a pre-tax income problem, not a post-tax income problem. The middle class's problem isn't so much that they're paying so much income tax, it's that their wages and salaries aren't rising.
Right, but the tax plans I've heard, so it doesn't cut their taxes. So what you're telling them is that by instituting a tax plan, which, by the way, will require blowing up the current system. So first, we have to completely blow up the current system that you'd have to tell voters, and then I'm going to put in a new plan. So it's very difficult, but I'm going to put in a new plan that will, we hope, increase economic growth, so that down the line, you will get a better job and have more income. Now that, the economics of that, I think a better tax code will do exactly what you said. A better tax code, a consumption tax, there's all different flavors, will create more economic growth and give people better lives out there. I think that is absolutely true. But as a political matter, I think it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to do that. I think there's a whole spectrum of issues because listen, we've talked a lot about taxes here, and so while Republicans are talking about tax plans, and I do a lot of blogging, and trust me, every commenter on my blog has a tax plan. I think every conservative in America has a tax plan, right? So while we're talking about tax plans,
cool.
Democrats are talking. I have a tax plan.
It's all we know.
The problem is that while we're talking about finding this perfect tax plan, Democrats have been working on health care plans, college plans, regulating the internet, financial reform. And I think it is sucking the intellectual oxygen from the right. The fact that we're not focusing on all these other things because we're very focused on taxes. And again, and I think frankly, business tax reform is actually more on separate tax reform, which is probably more pressing, which we really
I agree.
haven't talked much about.
We could do something in business tax
I want to
reform
stand
in
up.
this session.
I want to stand up for that point.
Me too.
Because
I
actually,
agree.
the work coming out of AEI and elsewhere shows the real beneficiaries of business tax cuts is the middle class, the workers. It's the worker wage earners. And the thing should be sold, frankly, as an income booster for the middle class. It's not, but it should be sold that way. It's also going to enhance incentives and competitiveness for businesses. But as long as you stick the pass-throughs in there, Jimmy, you got yourself a hell of a middle class tax cut. And that's what Ryan wants, put the pass-throughs into that so they can drop back to the lower C rate. I think that's terrific politics and economics.
Can I add one thing? One thing is what you actually end up with in a piece of legislation, like the 86 Tax Act. It's how you go in. I don't think we should negotiate with ourselves beforehand and compromise the plan. You go in what you think is the right plan, but of course you're willing to negotiate and willing to compromise to get a good plan. And I think you're right on that stuff. I mean, you should never let the best be the enemy of the good. When I look at the fair tax, I think it's a great plan. I don't think it's quite as good as mine, but it's damn good. I'd vote for it every day of the week and twice on Sunday. I mean, so tax reform, I think, what I don't want us to do, I don't want us to pre-negotiate with ourselves and put in all the things and then get in there and find we have absolutely nothing.
But you do have to hit a certain level of plausibility. And I think coming up with a tax plan, and we can question, you have the CBO and you got these private places like the Tax Policy Center. For any Republican to come out with a tax plan, which any of these private models is going to say, this thing's going to lose, $400 billion a year, or I think with most voters that is not going to pass the smell test.
But with Jerry Brown,
whether or not those models are right.
But let me just say, with Jerry Brown, we had a huge revenue increase from the Aldona and Gary Robbins one, which was plastered all over the world as to how it would create this growth. I mean, that's why Jerry Brown really did very well in the Democratic
By the
primary.
way, Steve Moore, I just want you to note, I live in New York and Connecticut, and on the way to work, I pass through New Jersey. Each of those states has a very high income tax. Each of those states has a very high sales tax. And each of those states has a very high corporate tax. So each of those states is declining and shrinking. So that's kind of the problem I have with 999. Because when I heard 999, I heard Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. Because you don't start with 9. I mean, or you could start with 9, but 9's just the beginning. And that's why I worry about that. I don't want to commit the sin that my friend Jimmy P. is worried about, and all we do is focus on taxes. I think there are other issues to focus on. And in the remaining period of time, I don't know how much time. We're going to noon? How far are we going on this?
Got about 10 minutes.
All right.
10.
No, we'll give a little more. Okay. I want to raise a point to Carly Fiorina. The issue that I fret about a lot, particularly lately, is the issue of marriage versus family breakup. Because I do worry that we are creating a permanent underclass. I do worry that the bottom quintile has lost its social mobility. On these points, I am certainly reading what the left liberals have to say, because they're looking at the same data that we're looking at. So some great work. Jimmy, is it Brad Wilcox from AI? Brad Wilcox?
Yep.
This guy's doing some great work. There's also work from Heritage that I read in the Daily Signal every day, which I love. And married families make a whole lot, not a little bit, a whole lot more income and wealth than unmarried. That's point number one. And point number two, the issue of family breakup seems to be the key to poverty, to inequality, and to the closed door, the upward path of America. So that maybe I should throw education in there too. But I'm looking at family breakup and marriage. These are big things. Part of it's economics, part of it's culture. It's got to be addressed. It's got to be addressed. Everybody running for president's got to address this.
So let me just segue to that by saying on this debate about tax reform or any of our debates about policies, I think sometimes conservatives start with the policy and try and relate it to someone's life. And I think we need to do the opposite. I think we need to start with people's lives and talk about our principles and our policies in relation to their lives. In the end, politics matters because it impacts people's lives in real ways, and policies matter because they impact people's lives in real ways. And I think sometimes we get very abstract, and we talk about big models and big numbers, and what people are thinking about is the microeconomic reality of their life. And they need to understand, how is what you're proposing going to make my life better? Which leads me to your point. I think the data is becoming unmistakable. You know, I'm a business person, so data matters to me. Results matter to me. It matters to economists. It doesn't always matter to politicians, by the way. But to your point, Art said, you know, the data is crystal clear about the impact of certain policies on economic growth. And we also now see in the United States, we have empirical evidence that supports the data. So, you know, we have 30 out of 50 states run basically under Republican policies, and economic growth is better. We're starting to see real differential between a state like Texas and a state like California that's hard to deny and that people feel in their lives. So now we come to the question of poverty, and I think the data is pretty clear. The data is pretty clear. Getting a high school education is an incredible determinant to someone's future, earning power. So if someone doesn't have an opportunity to get a decent high school education because they have no choices, really, to get a good education, or they have no chance to have a real teacher in front of the classroom that cares about them, then they're going to be stuck in a life where they cannot fulfill their potential and earn as much as they're able to. So we know that. The data is clear. And I think conservatives on that point need to be crystal clear that liberals and Democrats are on the wrong side of this issue. Look at what happened when Mayor Bill de Blasio said in his campaigning that he wanted to limit the choices of schools in New York City. Who is it who walked across the Brooklyn Bridge in protest of those policies? It wasn't high-income families. It was low-income families, Hispanics and African Americans who thought you're going to take away the only chance my child has. So we know education matters. Yes, we know marriage matters. We know that if you have a stable family unit, everyone in the family does better. We know as well that, you know, we have almost 40% of children now being raised in single-family households. We also know, so I think we need to be careful with this, we also know that too many women live in a situation of violence and abuse in their homes. So it's kind of hard to tell a woman who has perhaps escaped from domestic violence, the answer is for you to get married, that may not go over so well. But I think the point is we have to be focused on what are the things that make someone's life better. Mm-hmm. And we know what they are: an education, an opportunity to get a job, and yes, a stable family environment. And so when we look at our entitlement programs, and those entitlement programs make it more difficult to get a job because of all the things you've got to give up, when our entitlement programs make it actually difficult to get married because of all the things you're going to give up, and the liberals defend those programs, they are the ones destroying people's lives and livelihoods.
Tax policy has marriage benefits.
Exactly. They are the ones destroying people's lives and livelihoods. So I think we have to position our policies from a position of empathy and compassion and belief in everyone's potential to live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. It is why I am conservative, because I know our policies work better to lift people up. But we can't talk about it in the abstract. We got to talk about it in personal terms.
By the way, remarriage is okay too, right?
Yes, absolutely.
You mean
So,
marry
you know,
again, don't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, right, not necessarily.
Remarriage is where you marry the same person the second time.
It could be the
Marriage
same.
again.
It could be the same person. Who am I?
distinction.
But I'm saying,
Called
you know,
language.
you can come back.
we've
Say
done-
if the majority of years you're married, you're in better shape.
We've done a lot of work
You
at
live
this.
longer, too.
We've done a lot of work on this issue at Heritage, and I'm sure all of us have experienced this when you're talking to, let's say, again, your friends on Wall Street or, you know, the kind of country club Republicans. We don't want to talk about the social issues, you know, no social issues. Just focus on the economics. And one of the things I think this came through in what you just said, Carly, is these social issues are economic issues. They're really at the core. I mean, you said it very well in one of your columns recently, Larry, where you said marriage is one of the great economic stimulus plans out there. I mean, you were so right. A job is the ultimate stimulus plan. And what I think we have to do as conservatives, I'm socially conservative myself, is come about these issues in the very way that Carly talked. They say, oh, you're trying to preach to us. You're trying to moralize. This isn't, look, this is somewhat about morality, but that's not the point here. This is about behavior, virtues that lead to a good life and lead to success in life. And it's not complicated. That's the amazing thing. I mean, it's the old formula. If you want to get out of poverty, you don't have kids out of wedlock, you get married, you don't do drugs, you graduate from high school. If you do those four things, Larry, you know, you've got a very small chance of being in poverty. So my point is, we've got to talk about those social issues in economic terms because these are what lead to success in life.
I think it would be a good idea. I mean, as Carly noted, the data is there on the question of marriage, and the data is really compelling, indeed overwhelming. But I think, to a great extent, you're going to need some leadership and have political people talk about our culture. It's not inconsequential. You just have to do that. I mean, we have this, look, the other thing you mentioned, de Blasio, my favorite mayor. The guy not only doesn't want, you know, choice in schools or charter schools, he doesn't think we need a police force in New York City. That's just one of his newer ideas. And so he routinely throws them under the bus and refuses to defend them. And I think that all these issues are related, and they are social issues, and I don't see why candidates, I mean, the Democratic Party down through the years has been socially very conservative, not, unfortunately, in the last couple of decades. But the Democrats were on this. They used to have white working males and females, but males particularly, manufacturers, coal workers, miners, they have all left the Democratic Party because there's no cultural discussion of values anymore, which I think matter a lot. They've migrated to the Republican Party, but I fret that the GOP doesn't talk enough about this either.
To your point about social issues or economic issues, and the Democratic Party doesn't talk about those issues anymore. Let's just talk about life. I'm pro-life. But if you want to talk about economics, you will find that there are a lot of people in the African American community who understand their community has been devastated by abortion.
Right.
If you want to talk about the worry in some states about demographics are now working against us, because we have an aging, declining population, and then you think about the number of lives that have been ended in this country through abortion, that's an economic issue. And we're not going to all agree on all aspects of abortion in this country. But even on that issue that people tend to shy away from, there is clearly common ground. And on this social issue, it is the Democratic Party that clearly has become incredibly extreme. You know, I get asked all the time, well, how can you support the Republican Party platform on abortion? And I say, well, how can you support the Democratic Party platform on abortion? What it basically says is any abortion at any time for any reason at any point in a woman's pregnancy, including now in New York, the legislature wanted to pass something that said a non-doctor could perform an abortion up to 9 months. That is extreme. It is inhumane, and it's also really bad economic policy.
Latinos, African Americans, Asians, you're dead right. I mean, you're just absolutely dead. By the way, Jimmy, we have a population decline, don't we? Our growth rate in the population is slowing down substantially.
It is slowing, right, yeah.
I mean, that's an issue for growth.
Right, older, like I said, older countries with declining population tend to be less innovative. But, I also think it's important that if you're gonna try to, talk to people, low-income people of whatever race, again, you can't have that kind of message. I think a marriage message, a pro-life message, when at the same time you're saying, actually, I'd like to cut the minimum wage, I'd like to cut Medicaid, and I'd like to cut the EITC, and not having something to supplant them with, is going to be a really ineffective message.
I haven't said any of that. No. I haven't said any of that.
Not you personally. You up there.
I haven't said any of that.
Listen,
Look,
plenty of Republicans, they want to cut the EITC. They think Medicaid's ineffective, but they really don't have a good idea. They don't have an idea of what to do to replace it.
Look, I think you're absolutely right that conservatives must offer solutions. I happen to believe we have a lot of solutions. My point is, I think we have to communicate those solutions in the context of people's lives, not in big abstract terms, but in the context of people's lives.
So, can I just say, I guess we're going to wrap up. One of my other beefs about the current environment is there's too much pessimism. There's a psychology of pessimism in this country that drives me crazy. I'm a Reagan guy, and I learned from him about both the value and the truth of optimism. From my own life, I've had my ups and downs. I think if you believe in a higher power, if you believe in God, you have to be an optimist, and I think we need more of that in this country. And I guess my final thought is we need positive agendas, positive. We're talking about pro-growth. We need positive agendas. That's the GOP. I don't care if the Democrats want a positive growth agenda. I'm fine with that. As I say, I'm writing about the last Democrat who did, and that was John F. Kennedy. But my point is positive optimism, lifting up rather than tearing down. I still believe America is the greatest country in the world. I'll tell you this, there's no reason why a candidate for president in either party cannot say, here are the problems, but here are the solutions. And we can do this, and we can actually do it in a fairly short period of time. I learned that from Reagan. I'll never forget it. Steve Moore, Jim Pethokoukis, Art Laffer, Carly Fiorino, thank you for your time. Heritage Foundation, thank you for your sponsorship.